My budget shrinker stretcher has stopped shrinking and stretching properly, and I'm tired of it wobbling around in a bench vise. So in this video I'm going to make it work like it's supposed to and build a stand and foot pedal for it out of nothing but scrap, spares and cast-offs. Can I do it with a budget of £0? You can buy stands like that. They're about £200-ish. Which is money I'd rather spend on more frivolous things, to be honest. I'm looking to build the whole thing out of scrap that I've managed to salvage from scrap piles and womble from bins and all of that kind of thing. So let's see how that goes. The shrinker stretcher works by having these blocks of hardened steel that squeeze down and bite into the metal with little grooved teeth, and then either pull together to shrink the metal, as in this case, or squeeze apart to stretch it. And that generates a curve. Yeah, that's not looking great. So, full of little shards of steel, which need to go. Get some cleaning agent on there. I'm using isopropyl alcohol here and a little cleaning brush. I think it's nylon. That's a bit better, but I think we can do better still with a wire brush. I've got a wire brush attachment on my Dremel. Oh, focus. And at this point, my Dremel stopped working. Yeah. Okay, so that's another tool I need to fix. In the meantime, I'm just going to use it as a manual brush. That is a lot better. There's another problem here, which is that the surfaces between these different blocks need cleaning up and polishing and lubricating so that it reduces the friction within the system and makes it work better, but we'll come back to that later. So here's a piece of scrap steel that I've bent into a right angle even. Not really doing much. Pumping this handle up and down is actually quite hard work for my rather out of condition arms, which is why I want a stand and a pedal so that my leg can do the leg work. It's getting there, but ever so slowly. It is working, I just need to be able to speed it up. So that's where the next part of the video comes in. Where do I want it? I'm going to hold it there. So I want it sort of about that sort of length. This blue steel tubing used to be a garden swing, I think, and my friend Mike was going to scrap it but offered it to me first in case it was handy, and I gladly acquired it for my stash. I've already used some of it in a previous video to make a pipe anvil, which will be making a brief appearance shortly, but now it's going to be making the crossbar and upright of this shrinker stretcher stand. You can use round tube like this or square box section, it doesn't really matter. But because this is round, I'm going to have to devise a cunning template for cutting the tube where the two round sections get welded together. First I'm taking a sheet of paper and cutting the length of it to match the circumference of the tube. Then I fold it in half and in half again so that I've got 3 folds equal distances apart. With the paper folded in half, using one of the off-centre folds as the centre point, I draw a semicircle around the tube and then draw lines connecting a tangent to the semicircle to the corners of the paper at roughly 45 degrees, which gives me a kind of U shape that I can then cut out, remembering that I've got the paper folded in half, so I get a sort of double curve. Then I can just wrap that around the tube and tape it securely in place. And that gives me a guide for cutting the end of the tube. Those two pointy bits will need grinding down a bit to make it a perfect sine wave and fit precisely to the other tube, but that's easy enough to do with the grinder. I'm mounting the crossbar north-south in line with the body and handle of the shrinker stretcher rather than crossways, and I'm going to fit the upright pole not in the centre of it, but about 60% of the way towards the back. There's a couple of reasons for this. One, the weight of the shrinker stretcher is slightly on the nose just because of how it mounts. Two, it'll make it easier for me to rest my foot on one of the feet so that it helps to hold it down and keep it still on my rough concrete floor. And three, it'll line up better with the foot pedal, as we'll see in a little while. This grey box section is the remains of an old pull-out larder. Helpfully, it's attached by a crosspiece, so the two sides are already parallel, which saves me a measuring job, and I'd already made the crosspiece, the blue bar, the right length to fit between them. I'm not as dumb as I look, sometimes. The shrinker stretcher itself needs to bolt onto a plate that runs along the top of the pole. To give added strength, I'm going to use a length of angle iron, and I'm going to have the horizontal part of the angle bolted to the shrinker stretcher and the vertical part slotted into a slot I'll cut in the metal tube. That'll hold it more securely and give me more of a welding surface to attach the angle bracket to the tube. Except, as ever, it's not quite that simple. Here's an interesting unforeseen challenge. I've bolted it nicely onto that bit of angle and just sat it on top of the post here. The only problem is, by the time that's welded onto the top of the post, it's going to be really difficult to get a spanner in there to tighten or loosen those bolts. There's no room this side, so you can't use the socket, and there's no room there for the open-ended combination spanner. So I don't think that's going to work. I think the solution is to cut away some metal here and leave the kind of flange of this angle just in the middle there where it's going to fit into the upright bar, and then cut out the end bits. We don't really need these bits, so I shall cut them out. What I need to do now is cut a slot for this to slot into, and actually it's that way around, and then I can weld it up, and that'll give me lots of good purchase to weld on to make it good and strong. So after a little bit of a grind back and some paint, it looks like that, which has got lots of strength and is not that ugly, which is just what we need. And plenty of access to those bolts with the spanners as well. That's strong and solid with a flat base and an upright post. All it needs now is a foot pedal. Why do we call it a foot pedal? It's not like there's any other kind of pedal. The foot part is right there in the word pedal, if my limited Latin skills serve me right. We don't call it a hand handle. Anyway, I digress. This is my pedal of choice. It's an old kick drum pedal that I retrieved from a pile of scrap metal. It's made of a mixture of cast aluminium and steel, and it's only very slightly broken, so it's ideal for this. Got a damper under here that limits the travel. So we can take that out. Don't need any of that. We obviously don't need this bit, but this rod or a different one in the same place can be adapted to give us less of a horizontal movement and more of a vertical one. And it's nicely hinged at the back here. That's going to make it a lot more comfortable to use. The conventional pedal arrangement, I would be doing this with my knee bent and it would be quite hard work, but with the back hinged pedal I can just do this and it's going to be super easy to sustain over a period. There isn't a huge amount of travel on this, it's only so much. This rod is just held in place by a screw here, so maybe take this screw out, remove this rod and replace it with something with a bit more angle on it. And then I've got a piece of scrap steel pipe here, which I can flatten the ends of, and that can be the rod that connects the pedal to the handle of the shrinker stretcher, which will need a collar around here with a pivot on it to attach that rod to the handle. And then if I want to attach the whole pedal to the bottom of the frame there, then this piece is steel, so I could just weld on a flat sheet, weld it onto here and weld the other end onto the crossbar. But I'm not sure how necessary that will be. These springs might want a bit of beefing up, but we've got some springs kicking around, so we can do that. For the collar that goes over the handle, I've found a little offcut of sheet steel from my scrap pile, which just needs a little bit of polishing to clean some surface rust off and cutting to a nice neat rectangle. That's not square either. There we go. That's better. This isn't really a health and safety nightmare. My hand isn't quite as close to the work as it looks. Plus, cut-proof gloves. I've used a bit of welding rod for temporary geometry at the base here. That gives me roughly where I need to mark the hole for the top end of the linkage. Right now this is all a little bit like calling the Cones hotline. There's a whole lot of infrastructure going on and the promise of a way of controlling it, but the linkage between the two isn't strong enough to be useful. The first step towards tightening things up is to fix the pedal to the frame. This steel bar is supposed to be kind of riveted through there, but that hasn't been cleaned over, so it's just loose. It's a little bit rusty, so I'm just going to grind that back and paint it. This steel rivet is just sitting loosely in the aluminium casting, and I need to secure it so that I can stabilise the whole pedal assembly. The question is whether I can put weld on it without melting this cast aluminium all around it. So I genuinely don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to give it a go and see. Happily, the answer seems to be that I can. Now that the pedal assembly is all in one piece, I need to fix it to the frame. Here's that pipe anvil I mentioned. I want to do this firmly with a piece of steel that's got a bit of vertical give in it, because I want to put adjustable feet on the bottom of the stand to allow for variations in this rough concrete floor. I'm going to double over and plug weld the ends of this piece so that the welded joins are really strong and all the give will be in the springy middle bit, which I've made with curves so that it flexes more easily. Before I weld it together, I'm putting a couple of bits of 18mm board under the frame to allow for the height of the adjustable feet. I found a free source of those from the scrap pile. This is a washing machine which I've salvaged because the motor still works and I have ambitions to use it to motorise my bead roller, but that'll be another video. But in the meantime, it has adjustable feet. There we go. I'll have those. Now this has got plenty of give in it to allow for vagaries of the rough floor, but the give is all here in the spring and not strain on the joints here, which are good and tough. Time for another piece of steel from the offcut pile. This one's going to form an L-shaped bar that connects the kick drum pedal to the bottom of the vertical push-pull rod. Sort of works pulling it down, but there isn't nearly enough strength in those springs to push it back up. I'm having to do that by hand. This is slightly thicker steel than I've used elsewhere. Again, it's just off my scrap pile. What I'm going to do is mount a plate on the upright bar and another one on the push-pull rod and fit a spring vertically between them to pull the rod back up and return the jaws to the open position after each downward stroke. I'm folding over the edges of the tabs so that they don't flex and that all the movement is in the spring. I'm just giving this a couple of tack welds for now until I'm completely sure it's all in the right place, and then I can weld it up properly. My supply of springs only extends to little tiny things for things like carburetors, so shout out to Bob for allowing me access to his extensive collection of second-hand salvaged springs, and also for making copious amounts of tea. If you're ever stuck for springs for something like this, then you could probably do worse than get kick drum pedal springs, because you can get spares of various gauges for just a few pounds from a supplier like Gear for Music. Moment of truth. It's springy. I can reduce the springiness a bit by replacing the handle with a shorter bar so it's less of a counterweight. But it works. Or I could put in some sort of a bump stop or damper. I suspect that will spend a very long time languishing somewhere near the bottom of the to-do list though. Especially as I can use my foot as a bump stop and it's already right there on the pedal. The foot pedal, in fact. The pedal is now working nicely, but the shrinker stretcher itself, sadly, somehow isn't. Just not doing anything, really.
Yeah, Martin, I thought you had a cup of char because I'm worried about your well-being.
Cheers, Bob, I needed that. You can see here that there's no horizontal movement between the two blocks, so they're just gripping and not stretching. So what I need to do is take it apart and see what's going on inside. The surfaces are, they're reasonably smooth, but they're a bit grubby. That's kind of lubricant that's sort of all dried and whatever. So we'll give those a bit of a clean up and get them lubricated again and moving a bit more smoothly against each other. Clean them with a bit of isopropyl alcohol, which is my go-to universal cleaner of choice. That already feels much smoother. And some Bulldog BDX to lubricate them. It feels so much more slippery. It's going to be good. That's now got a much more distinct separating action as it squeezes down. Let's try it with a piece of metal and see how it does. Obviously I've speeded this up, but you can see that it's a great deal easier to do this with the foot pedal, and I can hold the work with two hands as well. I think there's still more I can do in terms of efficiency, but cleaning up the internals has really helped, and now I think I can declare this working. So, did I go over my budget of £0? Well, an accountant would probably argue I should allow something for depleting my supply of nuts and bolts and welding wire, but otherwise my outlay on this whole project was indeed precisely £0. The only thing I did buy was a can of blue paint to tidy up the patches of primer, and one day I may even get around to spraying it on. One day.